What's up everyone, my name is Nick and I am a super nice guy. And today I'm here to share some of my favorite tips and tricks to designing and working faster in Figma. I'm going to cover using keyboard shortcuts in Figma, discussions around spacing and layout, color usage and color picking, and then I'm going to end the whole thing with a brief discussion on design systems. Let's get into it. Alright, starting off with hotkeys. Now these are just going to be my favorite personal keyboard shortcuts that I use. You'll be able to find much more if you look up keyboard shortcuts for Figma, but these are going to be the specific ones I use every day that I have naturally gravitated towards because they speed up my workflow.
I want to go fast.
The first one here is just about zooming. I use this quite a bit. If you press Command and scroll, obviously you zoom around, but if you press Shift 2, you will zoom to selection, or shift right parenthesis and you will zoom to 100%. This is super helpful for me. When I first started off, I think I had an issue where I wasn't viewing components and screens at their actual scale, and that was throwing me off. And so if I always press shift right parenthesis, I can always be confident that this thing I'm looking at is 1:1 to scale. Next are some shortcuts around text alignment, and I do use these a lot. If you're aligning the text left, it's Option Command L, right is R, and T is center. This one's been easy for me to remember just by looking at L for left, R for right, and then I kind of just interpret T for text or center. Alright, next is similar to text, but it's object alignment, and so there's a few here that are helpful. Option H and Option V for aligning things horizontal or vertical. That one's easy to remember because H for horizontal or V for vertical. And just to show what that looks like here, to horizontally align them, it'll put them all on that axis, and then to vertically align them, it'll put them on that axis there. And then next we have aligning objects to a specific direction. And so this one again is easy to remember. It's W, S, A, and D. So it's like using the keyboard arrows, but it's using them on the left side. If you were to Option W, that's up. Option S is down. Option A is to the left. And Option D is to the right. Next up, we have some style-specific shortcuts. Now these are super convenient and I use them all the time. The first is that you can actually copy a style and paste it. So if we look at this first rectangle here, we can see that it has a defined color style. This next rectangle just has a gray color swatch, a random hex value. And so if we copy this, Option Command C, and we paste Option Command V, it retains that style that you named. So this is great when working with design systems and keeping things consistent, but it also adds the drop shadow, the style specifically there. On that note, you can actually, if you press on this effect shadow, I didn't know this originally, you can actually, once it's selected, copy this drop shadow and paste it onto another object. Pretty neat little trick. And then the next one here is something I picked up from Adobe that I used to use, and it carries over to Figma as well. If you press Shift X, you can swap out the fill or the stroke of an object. And so here's some examples of how that works. For this next one here, I'm actually gonna apply some shortcuts, specifically this add auto layout and this duplicate selection. I'm not just gonna show how they work, I'm gonna quickly build some things and you can see how this can speed up your process quite a bit. So let's say we want this to be an avatar. You can use a plugin. A neat little one is Unsplash. It's very popular. You can get all these images. If you just click on portrait and drop one in there, it will fill that in like an avatar. What you can do first off the bat is if you alt drag somewhere randomly, Figma will remember that, and you can press Command D and just repeat that process. But what we're gonna do is duplicate one and then select them both and press Shift A for auto layout. And then we have an auto layout here. And so we can just press Command D inside there and it will create another one within those constraints. And now if we wanted to say, make this one of those little avatar social components, what we can do is come in here and press space between, which just kind of does a flex, a CSS flex on it all. And you can crunch it in there like that. And then you can select all the avatars and add a white stroke. And then there you go. You have one of those neat little social components. And so that all came together super fast. And that was a combination of using a plugin, using these shortcuts, and the knowledge of auto layout. This next one deals a little bit with the layers panel, and I'm just pressing Command period, and that toggles things on and off. It's a neat little thing to do once you learn all the keyboard shortcuts, and then you don't really need much of the user interface, but you'll always still need some of it. Anyway, to show and hide an object here, let's pull this guy over. Right here, it's Shift Command H, and H for hide, that's how I remember it. That will turn it off in the layers panel, make it invisible, and hide it. There's also another way to make things invisible or hide them, which is this layer opacity, and you just press a number 0 through 9. This is one that's similar to Photoshop if you're familiar. If you press 5, you will be creating a 50% of that layer. If you press 0, 100%, double tap 0, 0%. You can also do things like 55 for 55 or 89 for 89% and then 0 back to 100. So that's a neat little thing. There is some differences to when you use show and hide versus the layer opacity. So if we were to make an auto layout here and we have this middle layer, if we press Command Shift H, it actually hides it and affects the auto layout. But if we press this middle one here and we press 0, interestingly enough, because it's just making the layer 0%, it's still there and it won't disappear unless you hide it in the layers panel. And then the last one here, Shift Command L, L for lock is how I remember it, and that will lock the layer in the panel, and so you can't touch or select it ever again until you select it over in the layers panel and toggle that same shortcut to flip it to unlocked. And the last bit of keyboard shortcuts that I'm going to walk through are ones that affect the layers panel.
Onions have...
So moving objects around in the foreground and background, or just toggling through what's selected in the layers panel. The first one here, layer move up, and I use these quite a bit, moving a layer up and down or bringing it all the way to the front or all the way to the back. If you press Command right bracket, you will move things up one item at a time. If you press Option Command bracket, you will bring it all the way to the front, Option Command left bracket all the way down to the bottom. And so it's kind of easy to remember, just Command and a bracket is 1, and then if you add an option, it's all the way or nothing. Next is dealing with selecting children. So if these are all in a group here and the group is closed and we select on the group level, we can press Enter and it will select the children there. And then if we press Tab, we will move through each of those children. Tab goes down and Shift Tab will go up. Also, if you like to keep your layers panel neat and organized, when selecting on a group, Option L will close that layer, then it's collapsed. And then lastly, if you press Command R, you will rename the layer to whatever you need to rename it to. The next thing I'm going to cover to increase your design speed in Figma, but really this applies to any program you're in, is having a spacing and layout system. The most common one I hear about and the one I use and am a strong advocate for is the 8-pixel grid system. I have a couple examples here. One is from Ant Design's design system, and really it's just multiples of 8 as you can see here. And then another one from a really awesome book written by a developer about design, so it's pretty interesting. But the way he applies the same approach, and you can see here that it starts really small and it scales larger. And showing another shot from the same person's book, how this works in approach is that we have all these spacing systems set up, the margin, the padding, everything falls under that scale. And so when you're designing and nudging things around, you only have to keep it on that multiple of 8, and then you can quickly shift up arrow, shift down arrow. You know that it has to be locked into some of these values, and you don't have to make as many decisions. If you're remembering all of these arbitrary numbers and you're not just snapping to predefined points, you're going to get pretty tired I found this happening to myself a lot when I was designing things and always keeping different random numbers in my head. I ran out of energy, really. I was designing and getting tired and wasn't able to keep going at that optimal speed that I always strive for. And just to reiterate one more time, I've mentioned this in another video, if you go into preferences and down to nudge amount, you can set your big nudge to 8. And so when you're shift arrow keying things around and you're already in a multiple of 8, it locks it in and you're just really assessing the distance versus how much spacing you're actually using. And I have one more thing to talk about on that same note, and that is how the 8-pixel grid system applies to typography. I have a header text and a body text here, and their line heights are both set to multiples of 8. So we have 48 here and 32 here, and on this frame I have an 8-pixel grid system. And if you zoom way in, you can see that the baselines line up perfectly with the grid. What's happening here is when you set 48 pixels to the line height, it's setting 48 pixel distance from baseline to baseline, and you can see that here, and it fits on the grid and carries that visual rhythm system that you've set up elsewhere. Again, the same thing with 32 pixels, it fits nice and neat. So that's how it can also carry into some values you're setting as you're defining your type system and in your type scale, and you're just locking in those line heights in multiples of 8. Next, I just have a quick demonstration of how I use HSL when I'm choosing colors versus hex values and RGB. The reason I do this is because you have a lot of control over these 3 main parameters of how we perceive color. The first being hue, which is just the color value on the color wheel. The next being saturation, how much of that color is present. And then the final being lightness, which all the way down goes to black and all the way up goes to blue. Really quickly here, say we have a base color that we really like. We can come in here and quickly say we want this to be a little bit darker. And so maybe we just pump these values down a little bit, and then maybe we do it again a little bit more, and we have something like this. And then we can do the same thing to make the colors lighter, and we're just, again, adding a little bit of lightness to these values here. And just like that, I've made a pretty good scale. I would go in and tweak these a little bit, but using HSL allows me to quickly adjust these values a lot and make these gradations that are needed in UI design. This next little tip is a quick one, but in Figma, when you have a color selected and you just want to make it white, you can press F and it will fill in all the rest, or just press 0 and it will fill in all the rest. You can also do things like press 1, 2 and it will make it 12, 12, or whatever the first 2 digits are, or the first digit, it will just fill in the rest. All right, and lastly, I just wanted to end on the idea of using a design system. It takes some work up front to set up, but once you're working in that systematic approach, it becomes much quicker and more efficient and more consistent in designing when you have everything predefined or working to be predefined, and you're just pulling in buttons and icons and components and modules, and it goes progressively faster the more you have. So I just have an example by Ant Design here, and this is just a random file on the community page of Figma. I think it's a trial, but here we have icons and buttons and checkboxes and input types. And so all of these have been built out with that systematic approach. And so when you go into designing, these can just be quickly pulled and dropped into wherever you need them. And ultimately, that's how you get really fast once you're in design phase. Now, I know not every project utilizes design systems, especially if you're at an agency. You might have to make smaller ones more frequently, or really make time to make them yourself because you're the only one that's going to benefit from them. But ultimately, it's always in a designer's best interest, I do believe, to make a design system, no matter how big or small the project is. All right, well, there it is. That is my list of things that help me design faster. I hope you got something out of this and you're ready to apply some of my own tips and tricks to how you work and see how much faster you get. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and remember to please like and subscribe so you can stay on top of all the cool design stuff I'm putting out every single week. Until next time, Super Nice Guy out.